Push-pull. People frequently ask me, what do I think about pulling a squeegee when I print or pushing? Does it make a difference? And the answer is it sure does. The answer for printing is you should pull, never push. And I'll tell you why people push and what's wrong with it. They push because they find it laborious, hard to pull. And the reason they're finding it hard is they're typically using stretch and glue screens as opposed to tight screens. And they're trying to pull that wave of mesh that forms in front of the squeegee. That's hard, and it's hard on your joints. And they recognize that. So that's why they don't really want to pull. On the other hand, if they had tight screens, sharp squeegees, mix correctly, doing everything right, and setting up only 1/32 of an inch above the shirt because they've used the plexiglass, then all they have to do is push down enough to close that gap, 1/32, and they'll be able to print by pulling. I will tell you, I've seen many people print over 30 years. As a rule, women are better printers than men. And the reason is they're less physical. They don't have the physical strength. So they don't rely on physical strength. They rely on other ways to get the ink through the screen. So on the other hand, it's the men generally who push real hard, and you'll see their blades bend, and you get all the problems from that. Now, what about pushing? What's wrong with pushing? What's wrong with pushing is that you're getting your upper body weight behind this squeegee and you're forcing the ink through. You're using your triceps and your shoulders and your weight to drive. This is not a physical strength contest. It's a finesse business. And the best printers are printing not even with the palm of their hands pushing on the squeegee. The squeegee is cradled in their hands, but they're really printing with their fingertips. They are feeling the print. And when you watch me print, for example, on our video, Capillary Film Increases Profits, you'll see when I put the squeegee down, I kind of do this, I'm getting the feel in the end of my fingers. And once I have that feel, that touch, then I pull the squeegee. It's really a perishable skill. If I haven't printed for a couple of weeks for some reason, when I go back to printing, I gotta get tuned in again. So I get that feel, so I can lay down a nice thin deposit of ink, so I'll have a nice soft hand and yet have the opacity I'm looking for. But you don't want to be brutalizing the ink and the screen by pushing. So when it comes to the push-pull argument, pull, but you need support, like the tight screen platens that don't deflect, and so forth. Okay, number 11, steel versus aluminum. You'll see presses that are made out of aluminum. You'll see presses that are made out of steel. Does it make a difference? It makes a huge difference. The steel presses are sold because they're getting into somebody's head that it's a solid press. And the assumption is therefore it will hold better registration. That in fact is not true. And many years ago, most of the presses were sheet metal and they looked mammoth, but they were very flexible, and the industry's pretty much gotten away from that. Then it went to structural steel, which was better. But the problem with steel is that it weighs, size for size, 2.8 times what aluminum weighs. So this is a labor business. You're rotating screens, you're rotating platens. You have to push, and it takes the same effort to stop the rotation as it takes to start the rotation. And that's work, and if you're doing this all day long, whoa. So the better presses are made out of aluminum because it's less labor. However, aluminum for the manufacturer is hugely more expensive. It's a higher cost. So the cheaper presses go with cheap material, steel. And the people who make aluminum are incurring higher costs so that you can have lower cost, easier printing. Of course, it makes the press more difficult to sell when it's a higher price. Now, when you get into aluminum, you've got a couple of choices. You can go with an extrusion. That's what our platen brackets are, but that's an extrusion, as opposed to a casting. What's the difference? The answer is weight and tensile strength. The tensile strength on an extrusion is like 3 times what it is in a casting. And so you don't have to use nearly the weight. And Castings have their own set of problems. If you're going to go with castings, they have to be done just right. If they're not done right, like if they're imported, where people don't really have the skills that some of the American shops do, you're liable to have porosity in the castings, which means they're subject to fracture, and you may not get the same quality. Some of the quality companies that use castings also machine them so that they put a tolerance into that casting that the casting doesn't have on its own. And you'll notice also people use castings, recognizing the problems, will have the casting be thicker around these black knobs and thinner in the other areas. So what happens with castings, since they have low tensile strength, when you turn these black knobs, these two flanges are more apt to spread, and that creates a pitch between your screen and your plot, and that's bad. So the main thing is you're adding weight, and you're putting the weight on the springs. It's more weight to push and stop. It's labor. So those are the choices in your metals, but definitely aluminum is the way to go because it's less labor for you when you're printing. So that's your choice.